We are now ready to assemble. Now, all of these pieces are absolutely huge, so I have printed out, I've taken a photo of each one, I've printed out and made it into a piece of paper so that I can assemble them here in front of you versus trying to show you this enormous sheet of fabric inadequately on camera. So this is how we're going to do it. This white piece here in the middle is the roof, and we've got the front on one long side, the back on the other long side, a garage and a window box. These are all the exterior pieces. The way we're going to do this is identical for the interior and the exterior. We're going to start with just the front and the roof piece. Place the roof right side up. So this is the wrong side here, this is the right side here, and then you've got the front right side up next to it. Next, take your front piece and flip it down on top of the roof. So they are now right sides together. That's the right side, that's the right side. And we're going to align it along this one long edge here. Then what we're going to do is stitch this long edge here. Now you're going to use a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'm going to use less than that because this is not a full-size pattern piece. So I'm going to stitch along this edge here, use a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And what I want you to do is start 1/2 inch in from the edge and finish 1/2 inch in from the edge. So you're going to measure 1/2 inch here, 1/2 inch here, and you're going to sew between those lines there using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So you can see here, I've just done that stitching. I started away from the edge. It's not right up to the edge, it's 1/2 inch away and 1/2 inch away on the other end. Then you're going to open it out and we're going to give that seam a press. Now, what I do recommend you do is press it with the seam allowance open, like so. That reduces bulk so that when this is actually on your tabletop, you don't have all of the seams on the outside or on the top. If you want to have a totally smooth surface so that you can be working or something on the top, then you want to fold all your seam allowances down to the side. Just remember though that you got the interior and the exterior, and some of them have moulding or they've got the roof trim, so there'll be a number of different layers at the top. But I'm going to press all of mine open. So then we have our front is now attached. Next, we're going to get the back, and we're going to place the back as if it is finished and flip it over so we know we've orientated it the right way, and they are now right sides together. We're going to do the same thing. Start 1/2 inch from the edge, stitch down, finish 1/2 inch from the other edge. So there we go. I've stitched that now. I've started 1/2 inch from the top, stitched down, finished 1/2 inch from the bottom. And I'm going to open this out and I'm going to press my seam allowance open. This is much faster, I have to say, doing it in paper than it is with fabric. I'll do it with my fabric one in a moment and show you. There we go. So that is the front, roof, back. Next, window box. So you want to decide which way round you want yours to be. I've decided I want to have mine on this end here. So when you attach these, you will notice that the window box piece is now 1/2 inch on either end wider than the table. Now, if your fabric has stretched or you haven't cut it out accurately so that they're all exactly the right squared off width for your table, then do make sure to double check all of those measurements and square them up before you continue on. But assuming it's all squared off and exact, then you've got 1/2 inch either side too big. So that's correct. What you want to do is center this wall piece here so that it's equally 1/2 inch over either end. Don't do it to one or the other so that it's all at one end. You want the overlap to be equal on either side, and then flip that over onto here. And what we're going to do this time is we're going to sew again 1/2 inch from the top down, finish 1/2 inch from the bottom. But what you'll notice is that then lines up with these seam lines here. So if you want to, I find the easiest way is to actually sew it from underneath. There we go, make sure that's lined up. And I'm going to start my stitching at this point here, in this seam line here, and stitch down and finish at that seam line. And that way this little 1/2 inch and that little 1/2 inch will be free. This is the exterior side wall, the garden side stitched on. You can see I've stitched it from with this right side up in my machine like so, and I started here at this seam line using 1/2 inch. I've stitched down to 1/2 inch there, and what you'll notice is that this little piece, which is unstitched still from the front and the back, should match up exactly with where that seam line starts. So this is unstitched here, and you'll see it matches up there. And then if you look on the other side here, you can see the 1/2 inch is unstitched either side. So again, I'm going to open out. Now on this side, you might find it easier to have the seam allowance facing down towards the side wall, or if you want to, you can press that back open like so. It's up to you which you would prefer. Then we're going to attach the last side. So garage next to it, and you've got it, it will be overlapping either side, and we're going to flip it on, and we're going to stitch from 1/2 inch from the top down to 1/2 inch from the bottom, and that will marry up with starting at that seam line, finishing at that seam line. Right, so this is all 4 of the exterior sides stitched on. You can see in the corners here there is a bit of a weird overlap where these little pieces here are not stitched on. So you can see those 2 1/2 inch either end are not stitched on, and that's all the way around, but the walls are stitched on to the actual roof part, and that's what it looks like underneath. So that is the exterior all assembled. Next up, we're repeating it with the interior. So this is my interior all assembled, and you can see again it's exactly the same. I did one side, another side, one side, another side, and the corners here are not attached, so the little 1/2 inch in either corner, and all 4 corners left undone, and underneath it is seam allowances are pressed open. So go ahead and do those on your actual pattern pieces now, your actual fabric, and obviously not paper, but you can do it on paper first if you want to practice the technique. It's quite a good trick. If you do decide to do that, I have a special needle that is it's just a normal sewing machine needle, but I keep it away in a container that says paper, that I've labelled, so that I don't accidentally go using it on fabric, because as soon as you start sewing through something like paper, it does blunt your needle somewhat. So I keep that needle aside specifically for this, and then I swap back to a regular needle that I haven't made blunt afterwards. Now this is it all laid out on my living room floor. My floor is literally not large enough to show you the entire thing laid out, but I've spread it out amongst the sofa and the table as best I can, so that you can see there's the garage at the top, the back of the tent there, the side of the tent down the bottom, and the front of the tent over here. I'll lay out my interior as well, so you can see how that's finished. Here's my interior all laid out. As you can see, I've put it so that the front door and the bedrooms are by the sofa, and the kitchen is by the table here. So that's the same as I had with the exterior, but you'll notice the window is now at the furthest away from me, and the dining room with no window is closest to me, and that's because when I flip it over to be right sides together, that will then make the windows match up. Now, if you would like to attach ties to the finished tent, which is great for if you've got unusually shaped legs on your tent, or if you've got a child who does not want you to actually sew down all 4 corners of the tent, they want it to be kind of more open, then you're going to need to use the ties. Take all 8 ties and we're going to do them exactly the same. You've got 2 for each corner, so 4 corners times 2 is 8 ties, and you can make them as long as you want. So take the pattern piece and make it longer. If you've got really thick legs you need to tie around, you might have a really fancy table leg, I don't know. And then you want to stitch using a 1/2 inch seam allowance across one short edge down the long side, and then trim the corners to reduce bulk. Once you've got that, then we want to turn it right way out and press. Once you've turned it through and given it a press, then stitch around the edges. Right, once you've got your finished ties, we then want to attach them to the exterior of the tent. You can, because each of these edges are going to be finished, you could do it on the interior or the exterior. We're going to do it on the exterior. Oh, I've got threads everywhere. It's a hazard of my house. There are always threads. So I've got the side window box here. The whole rest of my tent that's finished is over above the camera here where you can't see. And these are the two edges, the two sides of the side window box here. And what I want to do is attach a tie to either side and do that for all 4 sides. So that's all 8 ties in total. And if you get a ruler, we're going to mark 5 inches up from, oopsie daisy, that's not quite right, 5 inches up from the bottom raw edge, and then get your tie and place it centered over that mark. This is just a relatively close to the bottom is I guess how you would describe where this is. Do make sure to, if you can, drape this over your table first, and then check that these ties are in a helpful place. If your table legs are not just straight up and down. If you've got curved table legs, you might want to, for example, put the ties further down or further up. This is just a random placement of what worked about right. Well, not about right, it's what worked when we tested it based on a table of this dimensions of the pattern piece and that same height of the pattern piece. So move it as required. Then once you're happy with the placement, you want to put the raw edges with the raw edges, so that's the finished edge there, and then stitch back and forth a couple of times over that using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, so that is all done, and then repeat for both edges of all 4 pieces. When it's finished, it's going to come out like that, so you want it long enough to be able to tie around your table length. For the meantime, once you have stitched over here, pin this away out the way, because we don't want to accidentally catch it while we're stitching. Then when we're finished, you can take that out and you can use it to tie. So for now, stitch across here. Right, we are now ready to actually assemble this thing. How exciting. Now I have I have cut into my piece of paper here to show you the door, because your door will be like this. So this will all be attached now and ready on your exterior, and your door will be open. So before we do anything else, take your door, and you could roll it up like so, and you will have a seam allowance exposed under here, or you can just fold it up out of the way like so and have your seam allowance there. Whatever you do, I recommend that you then pin it in place. So we do not want this getting in the way of everything else. So pin that up out of the way so that it is not going to flap about and get caught. You also then just want to go over all of the other bits and check, is there anything here that is not attached that could get in the way? So for example, I've heard of some people doing things like making the spider double backed and having it actually hanging. If that was the case, it could accidentally go over here and get caught in the seam as we stitch it together. So pin that down. Over here, you've got the garage door. Either roll it up so it's out of the way, or pin it so that it is not right at the bottom. Now you do have the garage underneath that, so you don't need to worry about it like this, where we want to cut around it. But just we want to make sure nothing's going to catch in this seam as we stitch along there. And then on this one here, the same. Anything you've got loose, pin out the way. Ditto for on the interior. If you've got any of these pieces that are removable, take them off so that they don't accidentally get in the way, and then pin down the fridge. Take these little pieces off here in the bathroom. Make sure there's nothing around these edges. This curtain and this curtain could get trapped, so fold them up over here and pin them away. There's nothing else loose, nothing else loose. So we're now just making sure there's nothing loose around all of these edges that we could accidentally stitch through. So this is my tent laid out on my floor. You can see I've got all of the different pieces connected together, and on the front here I have folded my door up and I have just pinned it and also pinned the straps out of the way, exposing that seam allowance underneath where we're going to be sewing. So I've now placed the interior right side up on my floor, and I've placed the exterior right side down on top of it. So what you can see underneath is the interior, and what you can see on top is the exterior, and as you can see, it comes out the side. And what I've done is I have started pinning all the way around all of these outside edges. So all of these outside edges are pinned, and they're pinned right side together, and that's going to continue all the way around. The one bit that is strange is this door, and I'm going to show you that with paper. But as you can see here, I have pinned up, I've placed the exterior flat on top of the interior. The two wall pieces are the same size, so they should fit exactly. And then I've pinned around that door frame, and what we're then going to do is cut out that fabric that you can see in the middle there. So I'm going to show you now how we're going to do this with the paper. So pretend this is my tent here. This is my interior piece. I've laid it flat, and then I'm going to place my exterior piece with the door pinned up and the door straps pinned up out of the way on top. I will then match up the edges, and I'm going to pin them together all the way around, boom, 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 all the way around. Then when I get to this front bit here, I'm going to have it pinned down, and then I will cut out this interior front door like so. Obviously with a bit more care when it's your fabric versus a piece of paper. So then I have my doorway, and the door is still up inside there, and there will be a seam allowance along here. So then what we're going to do is we are going to stitch all the way around the outside here, up and around, round, all the way around like so, leaving a gap at the back. Now, when you leave the gap at the back, normally, I don't know, for a garment we'll leave 3 or 4 inches. For this, I want you to leave a solid kind of half of the back. So stitch in quarter, leave a solid half, 3/4 section in the back here, because there's a lot to turn through, and you don't want to be pulling and ripping anything. It's a lot easier to stitch up a bit of a bigger gap than it is to then have to repair something if it rips. So stitch all the way around, leaving that big gap at the back. Now the other thing to note when you're stitching is you're going to get to these corners here where you've got, if you put the two pieces together, you'll find you've got a 1/2 inch and a 1/2 inch either side. What you will be doing is, if you're using a 1/2 inch seam allowance, it should be going along here. You'll get to that point there where the two loose bits meet. Put your needle down, rotate your, whoopsie daisy, obviously this will be pinned, rotate your fabric, and then stitch down the next side. And those little joins there where these bits of seam allowance can fold back to, that is your pivot point. So you're going to stitch up to there, put your needle in at that pivot point, turn the fabric, and then stitch down, stitch along, put your needle in when you get to that point, turn your fabric in your machine, stitch, turn, stitch, all the way around like that, obviously leaving the gap at the back. Just to be triple sure, I've drawn these on so you can see my seam lines. I've drawn them on in pencil, going all the way around here, pivoting, turning at these little points here where the seam allowance overlaps, and then we're leaving a gap in the back. So you can go ahead and stitch that once you've pinned your layers together. I thought I would show you it all sewed together, but my God, there's just so much of it. It's enormous, so I really can't. But what I will show you is what we need to do before we then turn it through is tidy up the edges. So if you want to, you can trim along any bits like this, which are all kind of, you know, frayed from moving it all around so much. Then on all of the pokey out edges, want to clip the, whoops, I did that off camera, that was silly, I was trying to do it so I could see around the camera. You want to clip the corner, so just cut across that corner, not too close to the seam line there. You want to leave a little bit of a break so that it doesn't make a hole, but go close enough to get most of the bulk off. And then if you can find these corners here, where this is the roof, this is one side, this is another side, this should already go all the way to the edge in there, because you didn't sew these last ½ inch on the seam allowance. So it should go up and then pivot directly at where those bits join. If they don't, you might find once you've turned it through that you've got to turn it back and clip in to make sure they open all the way up. But you should be able to just leave them as is. What you will need to do though is find the front door. It's so big. Find the front door where it goes in here, and then you want to clip into this corner here. So this is the one that is, then you want to go quite close in, so that then this can turn through. I would go not all the way up to the stitching, but as close to it as you can comfortably get, because you don't want to make a hole. And what you can do is you can turn it through, see if it sits flat. If it doesn't, turn it back, because remember we're leaving a big hole at the back, so you can turn it through easily. Turn it back and then clip a little more. I would rather clip less than more, because otherwise if you clip too much it leaves a hole. So this is the other corner. Now that's what I wanted to show you. See, if you look in here, there is lots of layers, and in here I've got lots and lots of layers, and it doesn't want to clip all the way in. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to use my thread scissors, which I know is really naughty, but I've got a sharpening tool. So I'm going to clip in on one layer, fold it back out of the way, and then I'm going to clip in on the next. And this is the door here that I'm clipping. You might find that the door just folds. Here I've corked the edge of the door, so I do need to clip it. And then all the way in on the other layer as well. The door on this side though, I didn't quite catch it when I was sewing, so it isn't in my way there. I don't need to clip that. So I'm now going to go through and I'm going to trim off all of these external corner areas. There shouldn't be any other ones you need to clip into. Just want to trim all of these off and then turn it through and give it a press. Once you've pressed your table tent and got the edges all nice, the next thing you want to do is line the windows for the external and the internal up, and pin them all around the edges here. And then we're going to stitch on top of these lines. So this is exactly what we did for the door. And I'm holding the camera so I can show you here. So you can see I've then placed the two folded edges together, so that then these the windows are sealed on both sides, if that makes sense. So align the windows together, and then you're going to stitch around these 4 squares here on top of the stitch lines that you've already stitched on. And I recommend you do that from the exterior so that you can see the stitch lines. If you want to, you can do it from the interior, but then you need to make sure that you've lined this up absolutely precisely so that you then get a nice look on the exterior as well as the interior. This is how I'm stitching directly on top of the stitching around each of the windows. So to finish with the slip cover method, you want to put your table tent on the table. So I've got mine physically on the table here. Isn't it cute? Oh my gosh, it's like a little house in here. Get it on the table, give it a good press, make sure these corners are are well pressed, and then along this edge here you basically just want to pin it together, the whole edge, and then either hand or machine sew it. So you can see I started pinning down here. I do recommend you also go to the bottom and pin from the bottom up and make sure it is exactly even. I'm going to hand sew mine, so I can either now take this off and finish pinning it by hand, or I can take it off and lay it flat and stitch it with my machine. If you stitch it with your machine, you will end up with a little ridge running down here. I'll show you what the hand sewed one looks like now. So this is the hand sewed one here. I have not lined up my stripes. That is going to forever annoy me. Anyone else who's a bit of a stripe matching fiend will understand my pain. But it is well stitched down here, which I'm pleased about. And I've just done a slip stitch, which we showed earlier in the pattern or earlier in the tutorial, all the way down here. And you can see if I pull that apart where my stitching is. So it's just run all the way from top to bottom, and then now I need to give that a good press. Now, one thing to note is if you are doing the ties, you do not need to stitch down here. This will be open and you will have your ties near the bottom, and you just tie it closed here. And if you are doing it, leaving it open, then this will be literally how it's finished. You will have stitched along, stitched around the edges to make sure they're all nice and neat, and then this will just flap open. So your children can then, on any corner, they can lift it up and go in. And that's it. We are all finished. Huge congratulations on finishing your table tent. Whether you did the plain one or all of the options, it can be such an epic sew, and I hope it's turned out even more adorable and wonderful than you imagined. We can't wait to see what you've made. So if you haven't already, please do share in our RP Sew Alongs group on Facebook. I love seeing what you've made. Then, when you're ready to do some more sewing, make sure to pop onto our website and check out all our other patterns. We have everything from clothing through to decor, and there's more than a few other fun, magical, whimsical type sews like this one. And with that said, go enjoy. Pop this table tent on a table and have some fun with it. I hope it brings you and your loved ones many hours of fun and wonderful play.